cast topic is survival games, sandbox style survival games like Project Zomboid, where it's very open and you can do whatever you want in it, compared to or versus linear, more sandbox style games, i.e., Barotrauma, where it's more focused and mission orientated. Welcome to the stream, little chatfish, and I want to know your thoughts on this subject too as we delve into it. Welcome, Hugo Fuki, Boulder, Stone Age, Jaeger Rants, Sturha, and other chatfishies above. There are many, many wiggly fishies. How are you doing today?
And Harlot gifted a Bickering Bunch membership.
He did.
Oh, that one snuck past me. Thank you for the gifted membership.
He likes to do it
generous.
before the stream starts.
Yes.
Like a little fish.
So I just don't notice it. Yeah, I see. So welcome, chatfish. So
Maybe it's Kib's choice. I forgot about that.
the first things first, I do want to say right away off the beginning, there is, in my opinion, I don't think there's linear or sandbox none is particularly better, but they're different flavors of the same sort of like genre type, and they can create very vastly different games. So the first thing we'll probably start with is let's delve into a linear sandbox game. Now, when most of you guys think sandbox survival games, many of you probably think about Minecraft or Terraria or Valheim or things of that nature, or Ark Survival or Conan and Exiles, things like this, right? Well, Barotrauma is also a survival open world-esque crafting game as well. It has all those same elements, however, it's hyper-focused, and it's one of the more extreme cases of linear in the genre. And what I like about Barotrauma as a concept is it's because it's so focused and has like this own sort of narrative structure to the world and the setting that it's set in. One of the benefits that Barotrauma has, one of its strong suits that it has, is that because it's focused, they can really focus on the atmospherics of the Barotrauma setting. And if you're not familiar with what Barotrauma it's a sort of side-scrolling-esque underwater survival game in which you play on a submarine with a crew of other players or NPCs, and you have to basically get your sub to the end. And it has an end story element, and you fight like a big bad thing, and then the story ends, right? You figure out what's going on Europa and why it's disconnected, and there's an actual story to it. But the gameplay loop is relatively simple. You get in a submarine in each mission, and you go about doing your daily tasks, and there's a vast map that opens up to you. You can go up, down, left, right, anywhere in this world, and there's different objects. You can find other sunken submarines and explore them. You can find bases and stuff like that have been like abandoned, or things you can turn on, or there's different monsters and things and resources that you have to find, caves you have to explore. It's vast in terms of what you can do in it. And while it is one of the more linear survival crafting games in the genre, it also has a lot to offer in terms of its more focused style of experience. Now, there are downsides to that, right? Because can you do anything in Barotrauma? Sorta, but not quite. Like, there are factions and reputation, but the downsides to Barotrauma is that it may not be as open world as, Project Zomboid, where you can do anything you want from the get-go without anything blocking. In Barotrauma, you kind of have to work your way there. You need to get the resources to craft things and items to get to the next tier of like objectives. And a lot of survival crafting games sort of have these elements. As my headphones beep at me to interrupt my little thought. Let's just plug that in. There we go. Perfect. But I wanted to know what your guys' thoughts, as well as chat's thoughts, on Barotrauma as a linear survival crafting game. What do you think the strong suits, its strong elements are as a game?
Bear. No. You want to go first, Robin?
I can go first because mine will be very, very quick. I haven't played Barotrauma. Go ahead.
We need to make him play it. It's really good. There are other linear games we can talk about as well.
Yeah.
In the genre. Like Valheim is actually another one, technically.
Oh, there are many.
Yes.
Many games that fall in this category. Go ahead, Robin. Or
No, I'm done.
was it just
Go ahead,
okay.
Michaela.
Yeah, that was his piece.
I just want to make sure if you didn't
Because
have anything else
Factorio
to
would
say.
also qualify for a hyper-focused experience like this too.
But Barotrauma is an interesting game because I wouldn't even really qualify it as survival crafty as much as a horror game with a mission-based progression. Because Barotrauma is more often about fulfilling out contracts while making your way slowly but surely to the deeper waters, where things start getting a little scarier. The actual game itself doesn't really lend itself to survival as much as group management. And I think that's a good strength, because I tend to find survival crafty games to be nauseating and more often chores than games.
Mhm.
Having to manage how thirsty you are, how hungry you are, how sleepy you are, I find that really, really annoying, because days in survival crafty games tend to last around 20 minutes. So rather than exploring and survive, trying to assess your situation, you're like, oh, I'm hungry already. Oh, I'm thirsty. Oh, I need to go do these things now.
Yep.
I can't spend the time just trying to figure out my situation. I have to go manage my fucking moodles.
Yeah,
And I find that to be a chore rather than actual fun or engaging.
well, it's all about the game, right? So, for example, in some games, managing food and hunger and thirst is extremely important. Like in Project Zomboid, it's very important. You can actually get negative attributes if you have certain mods enabled, even that develop like negative traits because you did eat too much or you didn't eat enough, things of that nature, right? And because it's focused very much on food and water and consumption of those items and nutrition, right? In a game like Barotrauma, it is still in the survival genre, but it doesn't have any food or water. And the only resource that you really have to worry about is oxygen, because the focus on Barotrauma is that they don't want you to distract. They don't want to detract from the overall gameplay focus of the theme, right? Because the theme of Barotrauma is actually horror. It is actually horror. It's underwater, and it's all these horrible things underwater, and it's like not knowing the unknown, and that's the focus of the game as a whole. And that's, I think, one of its really good strong suits, because each survival crafting game has their own. A lot of survival crafting games don't even have food or water mechanics in them. Like Factorio, for example, has no food or water. You don't even worry about that. It's more about resource management, but it's about survival, because you are, again, having to survive the world and all the things that it throws at you. And you have to use the tools that you have.
And Project Zomboid doesn't actually fall into that problem as much as other survival crafted games, mainly because you can manage it really, really easily. You can just turn off sleep, for example, or you can manage your thirst by carrying a water bottle, and it's automated already. Your hunger is a constant factor because you have to manage your weight, and weight determines a lot of your traits as a character. Whether you're fit, whether you're strong, whether or not you can manage to actually deal with the enemies around you. And that's why Project Zomboid doesn't really fall into the same problems as some other survival crafty games. Sons of the Forest, for example, I find fucking nauseating with all its fucking moodles. I'm always hungry, I'm always thirsty, I'm always fucking dying of sleep.
Yeah, there are positive and negatives to that, right? So, Sons of the Forest, or the Forest as a whole, one of the big problems when it comes to its survival crafting elements is it's a bit abstracted, but I think as far as food and water is concerned in that game, I think I find one of the issues the game suffers from is actually the overabundance in food and water, which sort of contradicts the focus of exploring and learning more about the island. But
everywhere you look, there's food, there's water. There's very little penalty for drinking the water that's coming straight from the river.
yep, or even water that's coalesced in an area. Like getting sick isn't that big of a deal. In fact, it's actually relatively minor, because all it actually does is hurt your stats. Like they even have winter in Sons of the Forest, for example, and winter doesn't really. All it does is take half your stamina, and it doesn't actually hurt you or do anything.
It's completely negated by holding a torch.
Yep. Because that would be an example of a focused survival game that suffers. Because Sons of the Forest in the same way Barotrauma is a focused experience. It's very much set on like narrative elements. Like some of the cool and strong aspects of Sons of the Forest is the world and the creepy monsters and the tribals, right? Because you got mutants and you got tribals, and by breaking open underground caves, the mutants begin to flood out into the world, and the world now has to deal with that and react with that. And that's kind of cool because you see the tribals and the mutants fight and interact in that way as the situation further deteriorates, right? And I think that would be what I'd call the strong suits of Sons of the Forest, is that aspect. But I think a lot of things is we can get into the combat systems of a lot of these games. And when it comes to survival crafting, combat systems are actually one of the worst aspects of these games in most cases. I find most
Well,
of these pretty bad.
before we go into that, when it comes to eating and drinking and sleeping and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I actually like that a lot personally.
Mm.
Sleeping is like the #1 issue when it comes to survival stuff, especially in multiplayer games,
Yes.
because it doesn't make any sense. Like, what is it called? There's a survival game. It's like a shooter that's only online.
Tarkov?
Can't remember what it's called. No, it's older and more.
7 Days to Die?
No. Well, forget it. I'll see if I can see it here in my list, except that my mouse wheel is broken.
Oh, nice. It's always the mouse wheel that goes first.
But what was I saying? Oh, Scum.
Sleep.
That's the game.
Oh.
Scum. So in
That sounds
Scum,
familiar.
you have like pooping and peeing too, and it's
Nice.
just an online game with it's got like robots that are patrolling certain areas. I didn't play it that much. I think it's got like zombies and stuff, and it's purely like multiplayer, and the gameplay kind of only makes sense if you have like little like gangs multiplayer that are like kind of PvPing each other, but at the same time, in a friendly way. Like it's really weird to get it to work right. But the night is just as long as the day, and the day is really long. So once night hits, you can't sleep. Nobody can sleep. So the only thing you can do is you can either sit there all night and just like read books, or craft like something, or you literally just log off and you come back when you know that it's day. So like that's a big issue. But otherwise, when it comes to eating and sleeping, when it comes to it just being like a chore that you have to do all the time, I think that just comes down to balancing, really. But the main thing is that a lot of games, especially single player type games, like not necessarily, but like Valheim, if you're playing Valheim single player, or if you're playing like Green Hell, for example, the survival aspects tend to become kind of just like a thing. It's more like just like a health bar that you have to manage more than the game itself. Because to me, that's what a survival game should be. It should be about survival, while often it's just like a flavor in the games, while the game is really just like a single player story game. But like maintaining food and all of this, it's usually like at first you might struggle a little bit, and then you like set up one farm or something, and okay, now you have infinite food forever.
Yeah, but you
Like
reach a
Valheim is
stabilized
kind of like
point.
that too. Once you realize how to get the best food all the time in Valheim, you just have that constantly all the time because it's so easy to get, and then you just never care about food again ever.
Yep, you never have to worry about
difference-
shortages of animals or like resources because they just respawn relatively rapidly.
The difference with
Yeah.
Valheim is that once you make the food, your stats are essentially increased because your food are your stats in Valheim.
Yeah, part of the progression.
It's your stamina health, and you part of the progression is yes, unlocking those recipes like sausage and stuff. Because it's also like related to rest. Because how rest works in Valheim, you have to go in the building, and you don't need to necessarily sleep in it, but you just need to stand in it. And if it's a higher quality interior, how they do that is that you get a better rested bonus. Which I like the idea of it because it's trying to incentivize, like, okay, try to have a nice house. But the problem is it also gamifies it a bit. So there is a way to just be like, okay, here's the right carpets, here's like the little chair and stuff like that. And it's hard to represent
Yeah.
that, right? Because in Project Zomboid they have this as well, but they have it in single player because they removed the sleepies in multiplayer. I think you could turn them on, but it basically means that everyone's like gets tired, and as you get tired, your character gets exhausted. As you get exhausted, your character starts taking hits to their stats and starts performing worse and stuff like that. And you just need to sleep and find a secure place to rest. And I kind of like how Zomboid treats it because it's like, okay, yeah, my character's going to get more and more tired and will eventually either A, pass out, or B, die from exhaustion. Because that's what happens if you keep running around when you should be sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah, like sleep is the biggest issue out of everything because it works well in single player, but in multiplayer, it still works, but the more players you have, it's like, a graph where like the more players you have, the worse it becomes.
Yep.
Because if you have few players, you can do what they do in Minecraft, for example, where if everybody is sleeping, then time progresses. But if one guy isn't sleeping, then everybody's just fucked. And the more people you have, the more are the odds that that one guy is not gonna sleep or be able to sleep because he's like out somewhere or whatever.
Yep, that even happens in Valheim. When we were doing a community thing, like somebody was too far away, and it's like, okay, even if we stipulate in-house server rules that everyone must be at bed by this thing, there's always going to be that one individual who will not be back in time, or for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Who can't be back in time most of the time,
Because bad planning, usually.
or because it just takes so long to get to a certain place.
I mean, bad planning.
Yeah.
Like that's the reality, because like you should be able to actually have a bed at all times. But again, that's what happens when you introduce multiplayer. And one of the problems is, yes, Project Zomboid does have sleepy times, right? Or resting and stuff like that. But when you're playing it in single player or multiplayer from single player, is unlike in single player where you can actually speed up the time with a speed gauge. They don't have that in the multiplayer because it's not really possible to do that in multiplayer. It is because everyone would have to do that. No way can everybody in a safe situation speed up the status of the world. Not to mention what that would do to people if a zombie just instantly nommed them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's one of the big problems is handling sleep in a survival game, because sleep is an important mechanic in a lot of them, and you see a lot of games just forego it entirely. Like Valheim forgoes it in favor of the rested bonus thing, where you just stand inside of a building for 60 seconds and then you get your bonus or something like that.
They also make
Mhm.
nighttime extremely fucking dark, so it's hard to see. So you prefer
I
to
actually-
be out and about during day?
I prefer when they do that
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
because, and it's not just the nighttime or the sleepies that matter when it comes to that. Like when I haven't played that much Minecraft, but when I did play Minecraft, I made sure to get a shader that made the game pitch black. Now, I had to edit it myself because usually they don't actually make it pitch black. It's like you still have like 10% light, even if you're in a completely closed off cave. And what happens when you can see is that you can always see like the contours of the cave and stuff like that. So you can navigate anyway. And especially in vanilla Minecraft, it's basically like daylight when you're in a pitch black cave.
Yes, exactly.
But it adds the need for torches. And that's just like another survival thing that I like being something that matters. Like torches being something that you need to handle and manage is nice.
They disable
and it
enemy
just feels
spawns
cozy.
as
Well,
well.
in some games, yeah.
Oh, well, I was referring to the torches of Minecraft specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that's kind of important.
I think torches add a lot when it comes to having to use them. Um, when it comes to the mood of the game, I also kind of like and this kind of ties into combat, but I kind of like when you have to plan and think about what you're doing, what you're bringing, and like a torch not being quite viable with like a two-handed weapon. Some people might think that that's just annoying, but personally, I kind of like that certain weapons and certain things, work better for certain situations.
Now, before we go
I-
further into that conversation real quickly, Green Branch gifts a membership, and thank you for the gift of membership. We also have a donation from Sansa Quadrab for 10 post boxes. I don't like sand. End quote. Squeeby, a burglar alarm. Thank you for the donation. Very generous.
Mean to me.
Thank you
But
very much.
before we get back into the now that we get back into the light thing, when it comes to lighting, that actually is something. So it's an interesting conversation to bring that up. Yes, some people get annoyed, like, oh, I can't hold this with the torch because the annoyance factor. And I think it's all about how you experience a game, right? When a lot of people play games, they often play these sort of games with friends. And when you're playing with friends, it's something that I think we've all do this, right? Where you're playing it and you're trying to think about like playing it with a friend, but you're taking yourself a little bit out of the immersion factor anytime you play a multiplayer game with somebody, because it's hard to get really immersed in a game when there's more people around. The more people are, the harder it is to immerse yourself in the world and the setting to take you away. And I think that's why people get upset about that. But when it comes to lighting and dark, I think having dark areas and making the game dark, like to the point where you can't do stuff outside, adds another aspect to the survival layer, because it forces you to think strategically about the decisions you're making. Like, no, you can't. You can go outside, but it's dark. A zombie might jump you, or a monster might jump you, or you might fall, or something like that. It's a risk you're taking, and so it forces you to analyze, like, well, do I take that risk? Do I bring a flashlight and use a battery and like something like Project Zomboid and go outside in the night? Or do I stay in the safety of the base and wait for the sun to come up? And then you have to plan your day out and accordingly. And a lot of our friends I know get annoyed by the night thing. But I actually think nights are actually important to be dark, because restricting the player in a survival game, even an open sandbox like ZPZ, a sandbox style game, is incredibly important, because part of the survival element is you have to think and strategize. What am I going to do this night? Am I just going to sit in base and like maybe work on some skills or something, or work on tidying up the base and cleaning up an inventory management? Or am I going to take a risk and try to go outside in the dark?
Yeah.
I believe that.
And like,
Okay, go ahead.
and just when it comes to that, the planning aspect, that's also what I like, where like, let's say you have a survival game that's set in a medieval setting and it's got like dungeons and stuff like that. Having to stock up beforehand and not necessarily like knowing how much you need to bring, and having to plan ahead and then seeing, if you can finish something with what you got, like that part of it is partially what I like too. And like knowing when to retreat and whatnot. Because it just, like, the survival aspect, in my opinion, should at least just add like another layer of depth, really. Like, it kind of adds, it kind of makes like basic things feel like they matter more, like just going into dungeons and finding loot. Like, it just feels like it matters more because it's more difficult to do it. It's the same thing where if you're playing like Path of Exile in hardcore mode versus softcore mode, if your character dies and you lose it permanently, it feels so much better when you actually like defeat a boss or progress. And the same thing in Valheim for me, at least, where when I was playing it. I deleted my characters when I died, and it just makes everything feel so much more intense and interesting when you do manage to win and succeed. Because if it's softcore, if you die, you just try again, or if it's not even a survival game, it's literally just like, let's go in and do this dungeon, and then you finish the dungeon and it's over.
Mm-hmm.
I am of the belief that if you're gonna have a nighttime in your game, especially a survival crafted game, you should actually make it so the player can do things at night still. There's something of value that can be gained from it being nighttime. Either making certain enemies spawn at night that you actually want to go and kill. Certain objects only become available at night. The player can only do certain actions at night that could benefit them during the day or any other time. Because more often than not, it's just a filter that gets put over the screen when it comes to survival crafted games. It doesn't add anything of value usually. Because we get to games like Conan and fucking Ark, where nighttime is just a shader for the most part. It's just, now the game's darker, cool.
The animals don't behave differently either at night.
Before we get to James Dono there, one aspect of like the day-night cycle that it really comes down to balancing the length of it, but even if you don't have sleeping, you can kind of treat it like, because if you're playing, let's say Diablo, for example, your limitation, like your inventory limitation, that is part of what forces you to go back to town, because the developer wants you to go back to town. They want the town to feel like it's part of the game. And the same is generally true in like MMOs for hubs and whatnot, that you're supposed to go back because it kind of connects you to the rest of the game in a way, or and the day-night cycle kind of works the same way, where you might not necessarily want to be out at night, so you end up, you're out during the day, and then during the night you come back and you do all your crafting and restock and put all your shit in your inventory. So from that point of view, I think that's fine, but that really depends on the details of the gameplay, like if the game actually manages to make that feel good, or if it's just, I'm just going back, putting everything in a box in 2 minutes, and then I'm just sitting here waiting for 40 minutes for it to become light again, and then it's just terrible. So yeah, I do agree with you, but only like 90%.
Yep. I mean, I'm not opposed to night just being darker to take risks, because in games like Project Zomboid, the cool factor of night is that it does change some things mechanically, and I think mechanical changes, like, zombies being more active or less active at night, adds a different layer of tacticality to decision making, right? Because you can set the zombies to be nocturnal or to be less active, or because they can't see as well at night and stuff like that. And that sort of changes entirely how you think about night and what you do with it, right? And at night, not only do you have to worry about the ability to maintain visibility and navigation, but also to worry about detectability too in certain games, as well as, counterbalance that with the fact that, okay, what do I do? And this always goes back into the planning aspect. Often, I think with games like, this isn't necessarily a good example, but Dying Light, it's not really a survival game, but it's a action sort of open world game as well. But the problem with that is, like, okay, like monsters and stuff come out at night, and like loot boxes drop at night and stuff. It doesn't really add anything to incentivization, because it's like, okay, now you kind of have to engage with it. It's not really thinking about it or strategizing around it. It's more like, in order to get this thing, you have to do it. So there's less thinking and planning. It's more like you're gonna do it because you have to do it.
Mm-hmm. So James says, my view on survival, and this kind of loops back to the original topic about linearity versus sandbox. My view on survival games, I prefer open world environments and single player as long as it doesn't become annoying. A good example is Fallout Dust, which I've never even heard of, by the way.
Me neither, actually.
Fallout Dust is a mod for
It's
Fallout
a
New
New
Vegas.
Vegas mod.
However, that also gives you a hunger, thirst, and sleep meter, and there's no food to be found in many starting locations. So,
Alright.
and engaging with combat in Fallout Dust is a bad idea because every enemy is very easily capable of killing you. So no, I would not say Fallout Dust is a very good example of a open world survival crafty.
The game isn't particularly made.
It's not. It's not made. It doesn't give you enough resources to work with to start out with to even tutorialize. I felt.
But again, that's also subjective. Some people like that stuff. And when it comes to mods, personally, when it comes to survival crafting, I'm thinking of games that are generally built around the core concept of these mechanics, like Project Zomboid, even Barotrauma, or Valheim, or even Ark Survival. Even though I don't like that game, these games are all built around the core concept of survival crafting, being what the game is about from the get-go.
Now, what about linearity versus Sandbox?
Both have strengths. Neither would share those strengths.
What was the question Robin said?
Linearity versus open world.
Yep, they both have different.
Versus Sandbox.
Yeah,
Yep.
Sandbox.
Linear versus Sandbox.
I treat open world as sandboxes. Synonymous terms.
Yeah, they're both kind of similar, right? Because they each have advantages. Like, Project Zomboid is my favorite go-to sandbox game. The reason why is because in Project Zomboid, you can start anywhere, relatively, in the starting locations, and you can do anything from the get-go. There's nothing stopping you from getting guns. There's nothing stopping you from driving cars. There's nothing stopping you from going to anywhere on the map. There is no defined objective. The only progression in the game is just the base level skills. You can start doing anything. You can start carpentry right away. You can start anything. You can fish, you can do whatever, you can go out into the woods, you can go to the city even. You can even set up base in the city. You can go to the mall. Nothing stops you, or you can go to the hospital. Not sure why you do that, but you could. Nothing stops you in the game from doing anything, right? And that's why I like Project Zomboid. I can set up my base anywhere conceivably on the map, and it's going to be a completely different experience because the logistics around it all change on where you set up, and the environment you choose and the backdrop it all has, just the location and regionale. There's so much replayability. I've set up bases in almost every base I can think of. I can remember it by heart. I can remember the school, I can remember the town hall, I can remember the grocery store, I can remember all of it. I can remember the warehouse, I can remember the firefighter department. Like, all these places were cool and they all had different value for doing it, and it changed how the game played each time. When it came to like linearity, my favorite, and that would be the strong suits, by the way, when it comes to Sandbox. That's what I like about Project Zomboid when it comes to open world sandbox experiences, and what makes it so strong to me. When it comes to linearity, the strengths to me I find those strengths around things like either Valheim, where you have a structured progression system with, like, okay, you defeat this boss, it unlocks this resource, that resource allows you to progress to the next stage, and you can set up your base anywhere. But if you want to go to the more extreme aspect of linearity, you head towards things like Barotrauma. And what I really like about Barotrauma is because it's hyper-focused on the submarine being the core piece of your survival, that makes your relationship to this vehicle incredibly strong, and the relationship you have to this vehicle and maintaining its integrity becomes its own story in of itself. Each submarine you play has its own story to tell you about adventures that you had in it, the places you took, the places you saw, the places you fought, the places you died. And that's what I think is really cool about Barotrauma. The core focus for me is often on the home base and what the home base represents to the player, right? For some games, I find the weak aspects in games like Conan Exiles or games like Ark Survival, because the home base has no real personality in the same degree you have with a relationship like the submarine in Barotrauma, or the base you have in Project Zomboid. These these bases don't represent the same level of detail in that aspect, because to me it's it's less about those in those games, but that's what I find a weaker component.
In those games, they are just your crafting tables. That's all they are in Conan and Ark. They exist to craft items, and once you craft those items, you can abandon that station. Like you don't. There's no value in staying there.
Building up a base
If
in
anything,
PZ is a huge investment.
in PZ, it takes a lot of effort to just build it, to build anything at all.
Yep. And so there's a lot of attachment to that thing. Now you can technically say that you can do the same thing in Conan Exiles and in Ark Survival. However, what I would always dictate the differential between those things is that the attachment, right, you get to a base, it becomes very clear as to the overall aesthetic as well. Some games have really good base building. Conan Exiles has stronger base building than Ark Survival. Valheim has stronger base building than either of them. And so because you have a stronger attachment to that when it comes to how you build your base, the mechanics you engage in, right? Excuse me. Because there are strong suits, right? So Valheim has the best base building of all of them, in my opinion, because Valheim has the structural integrity system. So you kind of have to think about buildings and the support structures behind it. It's not a perfect representation, but it's close.
And just the building itself is really nice in Valheim compared to most other games where
Yep.
you can build.
Because while I like Project Zomboid a lot, one of the things it currently suffers from, and that they need to expand upon, is making the building more realistic. Because you can game the system, and that's why we have to set up house rules. Like, no, there must be supports for the structure to be built, because you can't just build a floating platform in the air with a little rope attached to it. That's incredibly lame.
You're back to Minecraft days where people built sky bases where they just had a ladder going down
Yep, pretty much.
to the entrance.
And the problem I have with stuff like that is that it's not very interesting when you do stuff like that. It just sort of it detracts from the overall experience because it's gaming the system. Something PZ, as far as criticism I can level at it, needs to improve is stuff like that, making structural integrity a part of the game's mechanics.
Mm-hmm. So for me, when it comes to linear versus sandbox, some of my favorite games of all time are linear survival games, like Valheim. I played Valheim single player, hardcore with no map and no portals, and that's probably one of my favorite video game experiences of all time. But I don't really think that it's a good game. Despite that, it has a lot of problems that I don't like about it, but it was still really fun. But from like a game developer point of view, I don't like it. And what is it called? Subnautica is also one of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. Green Hell on Green Hell mode with Perma-death, the hardest difficulty. Also one of my favorite gaming experiences of all time. But the problem with these games, especially with linear game, or specifically with linear games, is that because I have played Subnautica once, and I have played Green Hell once, they're story games. So there's no point in me playing them again. Because the survival aspect is just a secondary thing for the story. And now that I know the story, I know the solution to every chapter, it's just not a game anymore. It's completely solved.
Yep, you solve it, and then you can't play it again because you know the answer.
Yeah, and that's the complete opposite of why I play survival games in the first place. And that brings me to Sandbox. Because I have huge issues with Sandbox games. Quite frankly, I hate Sandbox games. And the reason I hate them is because what I am looking for is I'm looking for a game that's fun to play, right? And to me, a game is something that has functional gameplay mechanics and it has like a functional gameplay loop. while Sandbox games almost never does that. Like, while I can have fun in it, especially in a multiplayer set, or mainly in a multiplayer settings, I don't like Project Zomboid. Because I don't feel like, except for building things together and setting up a base, I don't feel like there's anything to do in the game. Like, I'm just going around scavenging cans, and then you have like canned food for forever. Like, the point at which you need to start making food is so far off that you have to like tweak the game settings or have a server that's up for years with like 100 people for it to ever start mattering.
Yep.
And even then, in its current state, if you're living next to a river, you just have infinite food anyway, so it doesn't matter.
I think they did introduce overfishing. But yes, the biggest complaints I have with Project Zomboid, and that's the one I like the most when it comes to Sandbox, is that it's not done. Like, a lot of the core features that we're supposed to have, like, you know, the whole purpose, what's the end point? The end point is rebuilding civilization from the ashes of a dead one that basically died, right? So you need to build up towns and build up people and create like actual havens and start agriculture again and actually restart and re-kick the whole thing, right? And then that's like the end state. But this game, Project Zomboid, been in development since before 2013, I'm pretty sure. I think that's when it came to Steam. But it's been around for a decade. And it is an indie project, to their credit, so, you know, that gives them a lot of leniency there. Like, it's going to take a lot longer because their project is ambitious. But yeah, when it comes to Project Zomboid, you do have to set internal goals. Like, what is our goal? What are we going to do? Because if you don't, the game doesn't really have any goals. And I don't think it's ever going to, even when they finish the game. Like, yeah, rebuilding civilizations, like the core idea. You can literally restructure and rebuild society after it collapses from the ashes of the old. But that's something it really needs to start getting in there. And they really need to start working on. Because Project Zomboid may look like a incredibly big sandbox with no story, but it actually has a pretty a hidden story. It's all about tuning in the right radio frequencies so you can hear certain events as they happen, or watching the TV at certain times to get news events. And there is a story to what happened in Knox, to what happened in the region, what happened in Knox County, what happened to the city of Louisville, and everything else. Like, there's a whole thing in continuity what happens and why the world is going to shit. They just simply are nowhere near there. Like, for example, electricity or electrician as a trait in this game is completely pointless. Other than hot wiring cars, it serves zero functionality. There is no wiring system. There is no actual plumbing system in the game. They are planned, yes, but they don't exist yet. And so that's one of the big drawbacks of a game like Project Zomboid. It's incredibly ambitious, but it has none of the actual stuff still.
The only reason to go electrician is to build the noisemaker thing, and that isn't even useful.
That's fucking useless, honestly. Because dealing with big zombies is incredibly easy, depending on how you play. Now, you can obviously, again, to this game's credit, you can tailor the zombies exactly how you want them. How good their memory is, how good their eyesight is, how good their vision is, whether they can run, whether they can open doors, whether they're nocturnal, whether they're daytime. You can tailor virtually everything about how strong they are, how weak they are. Do they decay over time or do they not? Because one of the things is that in PZ, another core missing feature is the NPCs. You're not actually supposed to be the only survivor. You're supposed to be one of many who are basically romping around, trading and starting to barter with each other, fighting with each other, trying to slowly rebuild society together. Sadly, it is, like it says on the tin, an early access game.
It is funny though how you're basically the last man on Earth. And ironically, if you're playing solo.
If you're playing in single player, yes, because they don't actually have the NPCs in the game. Because they, from a game developer standpoint, they can't add them until they add all the other mechanics so that the NPCs can work with the mechanics. Otherwise, they have to constantly re-update them because anytime they introduce something like plumbing or electricians, it's gonna break everything about them.
But when it comes to linear games, like, they do have the strength that for somebody who wants to play a game and finish a game, it
Mhm.
is the game.
True.
Like playing Valheim, you're always progressing. Like I fucking hate the progression in Valheim, especially single player, because all you're doing is just standing in a mining pit and just chomping at some fucking rock, and that's
Yeah.
like 90% of the game, which is a big problem because single player it takes a lot of time to do that.
Oh yeah. In
Um,
multiplayer, it's almost instantaneous because working together to like mine something, you can pull it fast. But when you're playing with like 2 people or even 3 people or just yourself, that takes fucking forever. And the fact that the progressions is based on defeat boss, unlock resource. Resource is always insert mining material. And that is annoying because the in betweens to progressing and enjoying the game is the mining segments. And the mining is not engaging because the game doesn't have. I think you told me this, but it actually uses a lot of base Unity code. That's why there's actually no tunneling or actual mining in the game. Like the terrain
yeah,
deforms, but it actually cannot. You physically cannot make tunnels and stuff in the game.
yeah.
It's
Like
impossible.
I can't say for certain, but I'm 99% sure that the entire game is basically built using Unity's built-in prototyping functions, which is, it's fine because they did make a fully functional game, but it becomes really difficult when you want to expand on your game, because if you built that on, one of Unity's functions and it's closed source and you can't alter the code of it, that means if you want to like introduce tunneling to Valheim, you have to literally just rip out the entire terrain system and rebuild it from scratch on your own, and that might take some time. And it might not work well with all of your other implementations with Unity's things. So yeah, I don't know if that's why they haven't released that many updates, or whatever, but
Entirely
it
possible.
might certainly be a factor at least.
They might have accident. See, that's an interesting question you raise. Because if they actually did that, that might explain why they're sealing themselves on the development of their game. Like, you cannot tunnel, you cannot mine the ground to be a certain way. And because you can't do that, you're actually incredibly restricted when it comes to terrain deformation. Like, you cannot moat anywhere in the planet. You cannot. Because the ground will not let you go down to the sea level. You are physically blocked from digging to a certain level. You're also physically blocked from doing other certain things as well. And so there's actually a lot of restrictions if you actually start to try to do some extremely extravagant constructions or extremely extravagant terrain terraforming.
Yeah, the terrain in Valheim is just one big quad, or I don't know if it's a quad or a plane. Anyways, whatever has the more polygons, and then they've just deformed that, and then whatever point it starts on at, because they changed the elevation based on like random generation, and then from that state the terrain can only go up or down, like a set limit. So like if you're up on a mountain, you can still only dig as far down as you can, like more closer to sea level.
Yeah, that is one of the big problems. And it also boils down to the question is how much of the other bits of code are actually reliant on base Unity things. Because the more they have, the less they can actually change, no matter how much money they have.
So in this case, would a voxel-based terrain system be superior? Perhaps. Voxel-based stuff is honestly pretty good, but it is also like 1,000 times more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually pretty difficult.
Yep, they're like voxels have their advantages. Voxels have been around for fucking eons, but what's cool about them is that you can really do some extravagant things with voxels. Like you can build all sorts of things. I mean, great example. Look at Minecraft. Some of the people in the constructions, what they make in there, or other games. 7 Days to Die also uses a voxel system, if I recall correctly. Um, And that's another actually important question. Terraformation. Some survival crafting games do not have any system like this whatsoever. Sons of the Forest does not. Project Zomboid does not at present. They're adding basements. I don't know if they're actually adding the ability to make basements. But when it comes to the ability to create and alter the world and shape the world, what does it do mechanically? And it's rather interesting because some games actually add things like 7 Days Dies. You can build trench pits and put like little pikes in them and stuff, and zombies fall in it. It's sort of a tower defense game, right? So it takes advantage of the voxel stuff. In Valheim,
It's a little.
you can kind of deform the terrain to make ditches, and enemies can get stuck in them.
It's a little odd in 7 Days to Die because zombies can dig, so it doesn't really matter where you build your base, how far you go deep into the ground, because they will make their way towards you, whether you like it or not.
I like how I remember when that game came out, there was a guide talking about how long you have if you build a base straight down before they tunnel and you need to move.
There are funny bases that actually leave a path for zombies to go, specifically to avoid that problem. And the whole idea is that you just make a kill chamber, where the zombies just get caught in a long list of traps, and you fuck with their pathings in such a way that they have to keep coming at you, and only a very few of them will actually make it to the gate that's protecting you, because you need to stand in a specific location.
When it comes
It's
to digging
magic.
in general, I kind of think it doesn't really matter that much, but I do think it's nice when it is a thing. But it depends, right, on the implementation. I think that digging in Minecraft is mostly shit. And the reason for that, in Terraria, I think digging is really good. Because Terraria is in 2D, when you're digging, you can see beyond the walls. And that helps a lot, because there they can implement things that can like come in from off screen, or you can, that they have little sub biomes down there, and
You can see
because you can see, you're not gonna get. I'm thinking of a
you're not
YouTube
gonna
sick word here.
you're not
You're
gonna have a
not gonna
problem.
get attacked from behind.
Yes. That's actually a good point. Like Terraria is not something we've mentioned, but Terraria has really good like mining. Like that's why when Terraria first came out, people were like, eat your clone, and I'm just playing it and I'm like, this is a better Minecraft. Like it does spelunking way better. Not only does it do it better, but there's actually things to explore underground and different types of underground biomes that you can explore, like the mushroom areas and stuff like that.
Minecraft doesn't even have things to explore above ground.
Yeah, I know, it's got fucking nothing.
Today.
Like,
It
Microsoft
they're
has done
adding
nothing with the
dungeons,
game.
But the dungeons aren't very good, and
The combat
the
system
players
is
are complaining about dungeons being added to the game.
Oh, like combat mechanics in most of these games are bad. Like Valheim is okay, and it has the most. It's and I mean okay, as in it's like it's serviceable, but most
It's
combat
terrible, but
is
yeah.
most combat is. I mean, it has the ability to stagger enemies that you can like block time. Like that's more than most. Like I like Project Zomboid, but Project Zomboid is a series of dice rolls. Like hold down right mouse button when target light's green, click. That's
Terraria
Valheim
has. Finish what you're gonna say.
Valheim works until there is one enemy in a slope.
Oh god, yes, because you cannot aim up or down. Your
Yeah.
character only swings on a horizontal level, which makes spears and pikes useless. I forgot about that. And they have I forgot about that.
Terraria combat is probably the most annoying thing to engage with that game. It's probably the reason why I don't actually have a very fond opinion of it.
Terraria
No,
combat is it's not.
You
It's
face a
terrible.
direction and you attack, and it's awful, and I hate it, and it's
I mean,
terrible.
in Terraria, in my opinion, the problem comes mostly from two aspects, and it's the art style because it's so low resolution, it makes it impossible to have like real melee stuff because you just don't have the reach, and that's why they made every single melee weapon be like a jojo or a throwing knife or something like that, right? Like,
Or
it's ranged.
Yeah, it swings
It's-
like super far.
It
Yes.
has such wide range that it can hit the entirety of your screen.
And that's like okay, but the bosses are like gigantic flying objects that just kind of walk into you, and
Yes.
that's what I hate about it.
That's every
'Cause you
single
basically have
boss.
to build you have to build like huge arenas, which I can understand if people enjoy, because that is like a part of it. But to me, it's just like I have to build this huge arena so that I can run around this gigantic floating head that's just gonna walk into me and do like 80% of my health in one hit.
Yep. I remember when we fought the wall of flesh and we didn't build a wall or a road. We didn't think about that. And even in the trailer
Yeah.
for their game, they show people doing that. Like
Yeah,
all
you
the
have to.
bosses are sadly the same in terms of how they end up functioning.
My major problem with it was that, like, despite all the cool stuff that Terraria does,
Mm.
it's all in contribution to the combat, and the combat's horrible. And the actual fighting anything in Terraria is awful, and I hate it so much.
My favorite part of Terraria still is the spelunking aspect. Like it's just it
That's
does
really
everything
cool.
Minecraft doesn't do right. Like it does it well. Like it's like, oh, mining is fun. Like mining is interesting. Mining is exciting. Yes, when you get to the combat, it's like, oh shit, here we go.
Well, the only problem is that everything's in service to the awful combat.
At least it's
And then
not
Minecraft isn't any
combat.
better because the Minecraft combat's just as bad.
Oh god, Minecraft combat is horrible.
Yeah.
It's about
Not great.
Ark. Oh god, Ark survival. That combat system is atrocious. I remember when fucking people were like, oh, or I had a friend who was like, let's go do this dungeon, and we do this dungeon. We take our animals in there, and they've been pumping this up like it's gonna be so epic, and then we like go in there and like I just remember clicking left mouse button on like a group of enemies, and my creature would just eat it. And I'm like, do that again, did it again for like an hour, and then we leave the dungeon thing, and I'm like, that was the most awful experience I think I've ever had in a survival crafting game. It was the most mundane, and it had no tension. Unlike Project Zomboid, where Project Zomboid has the same problem, where it is, yes, just the left mouse fucking button, right? Granted, you have to hold the right mouse button to do the attack stance, right? But the big thing about PZ that always gets me is the one simple fact. If one of them grapples you, you're stunned. If 3 of them grapple you, you're dead. You're...
What about Conan Exiles? The Conan combat, from what I remember of it, is fucking horrendous.
It's slightly
awful.
better than Ark Survival because it has a like if I remember right, like it has like a little bit better dodge, but like it's not good. And
As long as you don't play the two-handed sword.
Oh yeah, some of the weapons are atrocious. Like you think the two-handed sword would be good in Conan Exiles, right? You know, Conan,
Nope.
the big sword, bro. Yeah, well, big
Nope.
sword sucks ass in that game.
Do you want to know why?
So
Why?
slow.
It's because it was good. It was the best weapon, from what I understand. It was like super OP, and because it was better than every other weapon, people were complaining. And so the fix that they did was that they simply like reduced the speed of all the animations by 20%. So now it just plays like shit and feels terrible and it looks terrible.
You give the great sword to your fucking thralls, because you can bring like fucking 3 of them at a time. And with that output, like at the very least they're hitting most of the time, and you yourself use a spear, so you don't do the fucking retarded shit of hitting your thralls somehow.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do
they can't
think...
hit you or each other, but they can hit the enemy.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do think that combat is a big issue with these kind of, especially like fantasy ones, because more modern survival games usually just have guns,
Yep.
and you don't really do much with guns. Like you just make them feel good, and then you shoot things with them.
You give them a
Okay,
loud
so-
noise. You make chunks.
When it
chunks
comes to
fly off the enemies,
modern
that's all you gotta do.
modern guns and survival games, and I thought about that for about a moment, and as I think about it more, not a single one I can think of comes to me when it goes like, yeah, that's got good gunplay. And by gunplay, I mean there's multiple aspects to what makes good gunplay, right? Gunplay is not only having the guns look good and feel good with how they shoot, it's also having them hit enemies in satisfying ways. I will use a non-survival game as an excellent example. Helldivers 2 has some of the best gunplay I've ever seen in a video game. When you hit enemies in different locations of their bodies, it does different things to those enemies, and they have different modularity to the target spots. Taking off their arm changes how they move and how they fight you. Taking off their mandibles also changes how they move and how they fight with you. Doing certain things, like blowing off their head, takes how they move and changes how they fight you. Like, it adds all sorts of different variety and tacticality to what you shoot and how you shoot them with what you shoot them, right? And they react because each weapon has kinetic force. When it hits a target, the enemy who's shooting you with a gun physically bounces back because they just got struck by kinetic energy, right? So they're changed. My big problem with a lot of games is, take Sons of the Forest. You have a gun. You shoot a mutant. The big one, right? It has 0 kinetic force, no matter what it is. The gosh darn thing just beats the crap out of you anyways. It's like your bullets don't have any kinetic power whatsoever.
Now, my problem with this is that, and let me finish before, because I know people might disagree, but
Nobody talk about them.
I don't think it matters, unless you have like special enemies like monsters and stuff. And now, if we look at like Helldivers, it does matter because it still feels good when an enemy, gets blown off in the spot that you shot them or whatever. And it makes the gunplay feel nice, but it doesn't really matter, gameplay wise, unless you have like big enemies where shooting them in certain places affects them in certain ways. And that's kind of my biggest issue with shooter games in general, because the reality is, if you're playing a survival game or like any FPS game against human players or human opponents, or like not as in players, but whatever you're shooting is supposed to be a human, you shoot them in the middle. Unless you're playing a video game, then you aim for the head because it's the payoff is just better in general. But yeah, you just shoot them.
Yeah, no, I mean, when it comes to guns, I mean, even when you're shooting humans should react. If you shoot them in the leg, they should limp. Basic things like that. You shoot them in their arm, like if they're wielding a melee weapon, they should switch arms because that arm is not going to work as well, right? But the problem is, even with survival games have guns or combat, there is none of that, right? In Sons of the Forest, you strike an enemy and they might do like a stagger effect at the bare minimum, right? Project Zomboid, you strike an enemy and they recoil backwards. Okay, well, that's better. Like, different weapons have different kinetic value in that one. Baseball bat can hit multiple targets, versus a hammer will only hit one. So they have different tacticality with what weapon does what to what an enemy. A butter knife, it not only is going to break sooner, but also it can only strike one target, and it staggers them just slightly when you each stab. So it does have a bit more of a variety to it. But if you look at games like Conan Exiles or Ark Survival or even Minecraft, when you strike an enemy, the reactions are very negligible. Minecraft, at least they bounce back every time you hit them. That gives you a little bit of wiggle room, but they still are swinging at you. So if you're running forward when you do that, they hit you. In Ark Survival Evolved, all that happens there is that they just hit you.
You're just having a slap contest.
It's
That's all
literally
you
a
get. That's all that's
slap
going on.
race is what you're doing in Ark Survival. Arc Survival is about like slapping the enemy faster than they can slap you, or doing more damage when they slap you, or being able to tank their slaps, or getting
Mhm.
into a weird position and bugging out the AI and just using the flying mounts and shooting them, and they can't do anything about it. Things like that.
Yeah.
Things like... Yes, sir.
But
BZ multi-hit is an optional set, but if you don't turn that on,
Yeah.
what are you doing with your life?
Any
yeah,
fun? No.
yeah, I don't even see how it would feel like it would make any sense.
It's like my baseball bat only hit one zombie. It's like bonk, bonk, bonk.
I mean, in reality, it would, you know.
Yes, the most the
so
kinetic
it makes
force
sense,
would
but
disperse in the first target. Technically, yes.
yeah, and it's the same in Bannerlord, that Ian just mentioned. Because I can't play Bannerlord without modding it so that weapons can pass through enemies, so you can hit multiple enemies with one sword. Because it's just how the game's the context of the game, right? Where you have like basically a horde against you, and all of your allies are retarded, so to speak.
It happens.
You kind of need to be able to manage a group, right? To be able to hit more than one enemy.
Yep, you have to learn how to walk around them. You have to how you engage your enemy matters in a lot. I mean, even in Ark Survival, it does matter. It matters in terms of positioning. I will give that game that, and I don't even like that game very much.
Well, I
Positioning is
mean,
always kind of
specifically in terms of the weapon passing through multiple enemies. But yeah.
Only one of the zomboids can absorb the kinetic force of your suite and be effective, says to her. Technically true. Mordhau or Bandlord combat would be really cool in a sandbox game. See, it would be kind of cool if survival crafting games put more aspect into the combat systems, but it always feels like the combat systems are often the last thing. Like, I like Barotrauma, right, a lot. And the ship combat's cool because you manage the guns. But when you start getting into boarding actions and stuff, it gets a little finicky because it's on a 2D plane. And there's friendly fire. So, oh my god, if you have a big crew, it's like, alright guys, come on, back up, back row, back up, don't shoot. And otherwise they hose the guy in the front down.
Ragdoll.
Ragdoll, pretty much. Lay down.
Yeah, like when it comes to fantasy games, you at least have a lot of leeway when it comes to what you can do, because like fighting with a sword is something that you can turn into like abilities and moves and actions and that kind of stuff in a lot more ways than you can with shooting a rifle. But I have played games that try to do like Mortal Online 2 on Steam.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically a survival game. Like, it is, but it's like your mileage may vary, I guess. But they basically have Morrowind combat, where the only thing you can do is you can attack from left, right, up, down. And the only thing the enemy can do is he can block left, right, up, down in reaction to what you're doing. And that's like the entire combat system. And that's basically Bannerlord as well. Like, Bannerlord combat system is just you have a faster weapon than the other guy, and then you block, and then you can just attack because he can never hit back because your weapon is faster. Because there are no mechanics in the game or anything like that. No like instant parrying or blocking or whatever. Like,
yeah, Bannerlord doesn't. Oh god, Bannerlord's melee combat system could desperately use an overhaul, and additional systems and mechanics, and it just doesn't have it. It's too shallow.
Yeah, I just make a sword that is like as fast as it can, and then you go into a tournament, and then you just go up with your shield, block once, and then you just swing, and you can't lose. The only time you can lose is if it like turns into a horse battle or something after that.
Or it might require a bit more level of skill, yeah. Because the big thing is if you're in close range and your weapon swings faster, you will win. Like, unless you were a monkey and you really muck it up. because there is no such thing as timed blocks. There's no such thing as like parry blocks. Like you can't counter. There's no like heavy attacks or lighter attacks that really break like a block. They're just it just succeeds all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the big problems with something like Bannerlord's combat system. On the surface, and as a kid, I thought it was really cool because, like, wow, instead of it just being like attack, I have directions: up, down, left, right, bot, down. But then, as you grow older and as you play more games, you're like, oh, wouldn't it have been cool if it actually had like a counter system or something like that? Like, I think the biggest example I've seen of a melee combat system that was fun in a multiplayer sense and a PvP sense was For Honor. It had a high degree of skill, but the big problem is that, well, it's a Ubisoft game, being its core problem, but it has the issue of being, it's a survival game, it's an action multiplayer game.
The entire focus of it is the combat.
It's more like a fighting game, right?
Yeah, For Honor is more like a fighting game, but I honestly think taking inspiration from fighting game mechanics and adding them to a survival game would honestly improve the combat and make it more challenging. Because the problem with something like Bannerlord is it is trivial.
Yeah, fighting games are actually incredibly important if you want to make something with like dueling at all, because the way fighting games work is that you have what people call, it's not about combos for the most part, it's usually about what is referred to as the neutral game, where both players are they're not at an advantage or at a disadvantage, because like you haven't been hit, the other guy hasn't been hit, nobody's in block stun or anything like this. So, and then it just becomes about reading what the other guy is going to do and trying to like bait him into throwing something out, and that you'll be able to maybe throw something out before he whatever he did lands on you, or so it becomes more of like a mind game thing. And that's really important to have if you're making any kind of game with any kind of multiplayer dueling, because otherwise it just becomes like about swinging at each other.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. Because I do think equipment quality does matter in terms of how much damage a blow does and how much damage negation an armored piece does. But the big problem is that it really doesn't have that much skill value. It really is just who has biggest number wins. And that's kind of trivial. What makes games interesting to me is when, let's say I'm playing against Silverin and I have the best gear in the game, but I kind of suck at the combat. Silverin just joined. He's much better skilled at the game's actual combat. And even though I have like tier 3 or tier 4 armor and he has only tier 1, he is still able to beat me and best me because he just simply outplayed me. He had better skills and he knew how to time things well. He did feints and stuff like that. And it was a much more exciting and exhilarating combat experience versus, oh, here comes this guy with like max level gear, one poke, dead. And there's really nothing you can do about it.
What you're looking for there is typically what happens in Mordhau, because bonking someone over the head with a maul is usually enough. It doesn't really matter what armor you're wearing.
I just want the combat to be, I want it to be more skill based.
At least more than just left click.
Yes, because left click can be a bit disappointing. Like Bannerlord does have kicks, which Ian does bring up, right? You can kick an opponent if they get too much in your face, but games need to really start pushing on that more, like how to time counters and stuff like that, because that introduces a certain level of skill and different tacticality, right? How to pull off feints, like, oh, he's gonna swing right and then he quick does a jab left, it's like you didn't see that coming, because it's all about playing the mind game. When it comes to fighting games, and even though I'm not actually into fighting games, I don't really care for them too much, I think the best ones, the only one I've ever played that I actually liked was Revenge of the Sith movie game, which is unironically a fighting game. But what made it fun for me was the fact that, it has that, and you do have to think about your attacks, your feints, and stuff like that. You have to think about how you're going to strike your enemy, and when they're going to do something, when you should dodge, when you should block, when you should, you know, realize that they're actually trying to pull a heavy attack or something, then quickly do a quick attack, and then get in there quick or get out of there. Like there's a lot more thought in there, and that's more exciting. And it's just one character against one character. In Bannerlord, you have like a column of dudes, and they fight each other, and that's cool in itself. I really, 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 really like Bannerlord's captain's mode and multiplayer, and I think that'd be really, really cool. Is if they added like a co-op thing and stuff like that, and because they could really explore that. But I think it'd be really nice if they expanded the combat system to have more depth and less.
Bannerlords, when you role play it as a Hun, and you're running around with your fucking band of horse archers, is really fucking cool.
The game is definitely made for that a lot more than it is for foot combat is.
Because the directional combat system is it's special. It's only really functional when you're fighting one-on-one. But Bannerlord is about, you know, large-scale battles. So having a one-on-one fighting system for melee is not a fucking good idea.
What was I gonna say?
We're talking about melee
I think I
combat
forgot,
systems and how they tied to survival games.
In regards to, when it comes to Mount and Blade, it's a very large difference when you're fighting NPCs and when you're fighting other people, because I think Mount and Blade's combat system is terrible. Like I don't think that aiming is interesting. But I'm mostly like an MMO RPG player in general.
Mm-hmm.
So like I just like that kind of approach more to combat, where you have more like abilities or attacks or functions. I also played a lot of fighting games, and it kind of works like that there too. But when you're playing multiplayer, just aiming becomes a bigger deal, and it becomes more part of, you know, it makes the game more fun than just not having aiming by it just being there, because it becomes more skill based, and you know, the aiming actually matters now. But what they're talking about in chat right now, where when it comes to the ping issue, that is very true when you start making things, when you design things more like a fighting game. Because even now, like I still see a lot of people argue that, oh, you can play fighting games with people in America when you're in Europe, you know, like GGPO systems are good enough. That's basically like a rollback system, where it kind of, I'm not 100% sure how it works, but it basically like guesses like every single possible thing that you can do in the game, and then it like progresses in like all those directions, and then it checks like which one was it, and then it picks that one, and then it just continues, like, you know, and that's a way that it like handles the lag, and if it fails, that's when it rolls back the game a little bit, and that helps a lot when you're playing like across the Atlantic. But the truth is, a lot of things that matter in fighting games are like reacting to an overhead, because generally in pretty much every single fighting game, you're sitting, like you're crouching and you're blocking, because if you're blocking low, you can't get hit by like mid attacks, you can't get hit by low attacks. But then a lot of characters have like overhead attacks that are generally a lot slower, or they have like special moves. You can jump up in the air, and that counts as an overhead, and that will hit you when you're crouching, and then you have to react on that. And in Guilty Gear, like Biken has a move she can do in the air, and it's like 9 frames or something, and then you have to react to that, and then you have like 2 frames delay if you're playing somebody in Europe. Okay, now it's 7 frames to react to that. Okay, now you're playing against somebody in the States. Okay, now you have like 6 frames delay. So now you have 3 frames to react to that. And it really quickly turns into, like, the difference between offline play is like, okay, I can react to this, and online play is, okay, this is completely unblockable, and the game is unplayable now.
Mhm.
And that's a big issue when you have like really tight skill-based games based on like fighting game design in situations where you can't control the latency of everybody involved.
Yeah.
Like lobbies, you might just have some random Brazilian there with like a mobile phone connection, and
He's doing what he can with what he got. But yeah, no, like in a PvP sense, yes, that makes it critical. Even to a degree PvE, right? PvP is generally going to be a lot more intense because then there's that challenge, the race between two players against each other. In a PvE sense, it's not as big of a deal because in a PvE sense, you know, you're only fighting against bots, and odds are you can probably recover your items if you even perish. In most cases, like in Valheim or Project Zomboid or Ark or Conan Exiles, if you die, you can go and get your stuff. You just need to go back and go get it. But if you're in a PvP scenario, or PvP survival crafting game, and we haven't even gotten into that mess, because that's a whole other mess too. Like Rust versus anything else, because Rust is the only PvP survival crafting game I played that I had a modicum degree of fun in. Versus Ark Survival Evolved, and I just thought it was bad. At least Rust is designed around the core concept of it being a PvP game. It's funny, and the community is fun. At least the last time I played it, because it's so weird and random, and it's very much different per culture and server and what that you're in, and the people you're engaged with or around, and you build up a reputation with it. And that's more of a localized experience because each experience will be different because it's going to be hyper specific to the individuals you interact with in the game, right? Some players might just want to fuck with you. Some players might want to just hang out and chill. Some players are actually just cool people that don't really want to mess with you and actually are helpful. Others, not so much. It's really just a crapshoot.
Some players get really fucking upsetty spaghetti if you inconvenience them in any way. So they
Yes.
Some players just want to watch the world burn.
Unironically, yeah. And those have a different experience altogether, right? Because I've seen Project Zomboid PvP servers. I've even played PC and PvP. My biggest problem with PC and PvP is that most people that run those servers, they get a little biased. They get a little bit grumpy if things don't go their way.
Yeah.
They can
PvP
also be a bit
games,
tyrants.
They're not really playable unless you play it in the way that they are playable. And that is joining the group. Because if you try to play a game like that single player or solo or even with like 3 friends, it doesn't work. Like, it's not a survival game, but it is it is a crafting a crafting sandbox game. I played a bit of Albion Online pretty recently, and it's literally fantasy EVE Online, where you have high-sec zones where if you die, you don't lose anything, right? And the people who PvP people there, they lose reputation, and you know, it's literally only a penalty for them to PvP you there. But you can't get anything interesting there, so it doesn't matter.
Yep.
And then you have like the low-sec zones where if you die there, you get thrown out of the zone. I'm not sure what happens there, but I think it's free PvP there, but you have you have more things that you can fetch there. And then there are red zones where if you die there, I'm not sure if you lose everything, but there are red zones and black zones, and in one of them you lose all your gear, and in the other one I'm not really sure what happens, but and for me this sucks because I'm not a huge fan of joining big groups.
Yep.
Because it's a lot of work. Like, I try in Albion, I joined like 3 different guilds, but it's a lot of work to find people that you enjoy playing with, and there's also a factor of like having to join Discord and stuff like that. Like, you have to sit in Discord voice chats, and for me it's just too much.
It's a huge commitment, yeah, because the big problem with survival crafting games or survival games of any type that add a PvP or multiplayer element or even like EVE Online is if you don't engage with the social aspect, you are gated out pretty quickly. You can't solo play
Yeah.
in a lot of these games, and EVE Online especially. Even as a independent corporation, we tried making our own guild or corporation, and all we were doing was being manufacturing. We mined and processed ore into different manufacturing goods, and then sold those on the market and undercut competitors. The issue is even just doing that and relatively secure space, like it was like 6.0 or 7.0 or something like that. Or I don't remember what the ratings are. My brain's too fried at the moment. But at that point, there would be one player. There was one player who was basically like, if you don't pay this tax, we're gonna blow up your stuff. And I don't have anything against the player for doing that. That's actually totally how the game is designed to do. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
we're gonna refuse him. We're gonna fight him. And so it's like, okay, we'll fight him. And so we made a decision as a corporation to fight him. Some of us set up defensive ships and perimeters around the mining crews, and I was the Orca freighter. So I'm the freighter where all the mining ships offload their payloads to, while we had security ships running escort detail. The issue with that, though, is because how EVE Online works, you could just buy a certain ship, set it up to be basically a suicide ship, where you go in, you blow up our ship almost instantly because you can deal so much damage, and then just attrition us because you can buy these little cheap ships at such a low rate that economically we couldn't compete. We were not producing enough ISK and resources and sales for our resources to replace damaged or destroyed ships. He was destroying so much in terms of ISK damage, and that in a way is cool, and in a certain light, and I actually like some parts of that. But the problem is because of how that worked, it meant that it was physically impossible, no matter what we did with our security detail, whether they were Galente battleships or Galente cruisers or Caladari missile frigates or whatever. It didn't matter what we deployed on the field to escort our ships into the asteroid belts. One ship would just instantly blow up like several of ours because of how they were built, and there was nothing we could do about it. And because of that, it just like, don't want to play anymore. Just drop it. And that's one of the big things about PvP you got to be careful of.
Yeah, that's why, like, for me, they don't work. Like, I really never want to play a PvP MMO or like survival game like ever again, really. But if you are the kind of person who really likes to get into guilds and, you know, play with the big groups and whatnot, I think they're probably some of the best games around. Because like in Albion, you have like you can have headquarters that you can take over. Like, this map is our headquarter, and we have a castle here, and then you get to build like defenses, you know, catapults and walls and this kind of stuff. And then at certain points during the day, there's like an opening where people can attack you, and then the guild has to, you know, get together and defend against that kind of stuff. And then you go around, you know, killing rival guilds and stuff like that. So if you can really get into that, that's probably really cool. I just don't have the patience for it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think on paper, EVE Online is a really cool game, and games like that, like Albion and stuff, I think that's really fucking cool. My biggest problem comes down to, I think fundamentally those games don't have really good combat systems. Like, even in EVE Online, like the actual gameplay itself wasn't very good. What was interesting was more so the interactions you had with other players and the relationships and reputation you established by playing that game. We established an interesting reputation of being relatively pacifistic to the point where most people were pretty cool with us and most people would be pretty nice to us. There were even some big corporal alliances that were actually just talking and hanging out with us all the time. Then they could easily snuff us out at a moment's notice. And they didn't. They just let us exist, which was I appreciate, you know? But like, one of the things is that when it came down to like that particular person doing that, it's like we had two choices. And we could join one of those big corporal alliances and just be rolled up inside of them, and then they'd protect us and stuff like that, or quit playing the game. And it was like one of those things like, well, I find the idea of being independent and doing and creating our own corporation, being our own little thing, more cool and more interesting than rolling up into a big alliance. Because the tantalizing aspect of forging your own destiny is far more interesting than rolling into a bigger alliance. And then we just chose to we'll try to see if we can beat this on our own. Ultimately, we couldn't, so we just threw in the towel.
Mm-hmm. It also boils down to systems sometimes too, and just like what you can do, like the fact that you can build these suicide ships, for example, like that could probably be alleviated if they just tweaked some numbers somewhere.
Yeah, so they don't be that effective. Like you have a ship that can just jump in, blow up one of our Orca freighters, which costs a bajillion fucking bucks, and then doesn't matter if we shoot him down by then, because at that point he's blown up one or two other ships, even if our other ships are responding, and basically trying to fight him. It's just the damage output is not comparable because those freighters just do not have the health to stay alive.
Mm-hmm. Now, in Albion, first of all, the combat is actually like okay. It's not super deep, but it's basically like a MOBA, except that instead of having like 4 abilities, you have around 8, and it's based on like what gear you're wearing. If you're wearing plate mail, you usually get defensive things, taunts, like AoE shields. If you're wearing medium armor, it's usually somewhere in between. It's more defensive, get like damage auras and whatnot. And if you're wearing cloth, it really depends. It can be more like purging debuffs and teleports, more offensive things. And then you have a bunch of different weapon types that can have, there are like 6 different swords, and they all have different abilities, at least partially. So there's still quite a lot of like customizing that you can do with your character, which is nice. However, when you join a guild, they're gonna be like, oh, if you're gonna come in PvP, you have to play this. We need this weapon because it's OP right now. So if you come and you don't have that, you can't come. And I'm like, all right, then I don't want to play.
Yeah, you get pressured into things, and that ruins part of the game, because
which is also counterproductive for them, because it just means that like even if I don't have optimal loadout, if I don't want to play, that's just like one less player for them. But when it comes to just general systems as well, and like the effect that they can have, like I mentioned in Albion, you can own like a headquarter. And in every zone there are people going around just farming materials and whatnot.
Yeah.
And when I was playing, the way it worked is basically the guildies for whatever guild owns that headquarter, they just go around killing everybody in the zone. So like, this is our zone, fuck you guys, don't take our stuff. And I played for like half a month or something, like maybe a month. And when I quit, they were just about to release a patch that were going to make it so that if you own a headquarter, every single thing that people loot on the map, including like killing from enemies, just mining, whatever, a portion of that is going to end up in a chest in your headquarter. So it's kind of like a taxation on everybody that's there. And that just completely changed how the game is played, because now it's more like, okay, we're going to protect everybody that's here so that they can play the game, so that we get materials and rewards from people just playing the game.
That's a pretty cool system. I kind of like that.
But it's an example of like how it's not necessarily as simple as, Sandbox bad or linear good. That oftentimes it really comes down to details and how certain systems are implemented, and like literally just eating. Like, do I have to eat every 20 minutes? Okay, this is just annoying. Or, is it some designed in a way where it's less tedious and shit?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to a lot of these games and how their mechanics work, it's always interesting when you see certain things like work out a certain way. Like, having kings and stuff. And Chad also mentions like Reign of Kings also had like a taxation system. Never played Reign of Kings, but I did see that one. And it was always a cool idea when they expand on the concept of how the systems work more than just being like, Product Envoy jumping in the world, and there's a bit more to it, or layered systems. That's always cool to see.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at what Ragnarok said. It says player-driven economies always congregate into one or two large groups.
That is pretty much true.
That is sadly true. Even online, there's like the big alliances, and then there's little corps. But it's true, and it's also not entirely true, because there's like the middle tier corps, and those ones are able to stay independent on their own kinda. It's is if you fall below that threshold, you're in the small corp size. And when we tried playing, we rallied, I think, about 40 people or 30 people into our corp. And so we were a 40-player corp, or 40 to 30-player corp, I think. I think we got to 60 at our peak. There was quite a few of us. But even though there was quite a few of us, well, most of us had potato ships. And I was the only one who had been playing EVE Online independently, on and off, because I actually really liked EVE. And I'd amassed a lot of wealth, so in ISK, and what I did is basically help fund and start the corp, and along with somebody else. And so we got this little corp going, and we got like mining operations set up. We got these fucking big ships, and it was really cool. It was I actually kind of miss it, to be honest. Like certain aspects of it, it was definitely fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even, like I really think Albion is cool. I would enjoy it a lot if I had the energy to hop into voice chats, and if I actually got to play what I wanted to play, because that's like a big deal for me. Because when I play games in general, where you have like fantasy, whatever, you can make builds. I generally like making like archetypes. Like I want to play a paladin, and then I pick gear and abilities and whatnot that fit that, even if it's not optimal. And then when somebody says like, okay, no, you have to play this because it's better, I just lose interest instantly.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is taxing, because it is a commitment too. Even EVE Online was. It was very much a commitment.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was like, was it fun? Yes. Do I want to ever one day go back to it? I'd like to try EVE Online again. But I also heard that they also got bought out by a Chinese company. Then I also heard that they started getting pushed down the thing. Also, my uncle's got some interesting stories on their corporation, like the actual corporation that made the game. Because how did he put it to me once when I asked him about it? Because I was interested in the game back then. He's like, their company works very much how the game actually works, in terms of like corporate bullshit. So, interesting corporate culture. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. Let's have experience with it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or survival crafted games with these kind of groups that tend to form when they're PvP focused. That's also a thing that happens a lot, where major guilds will pop up in a server. Even servers that have where they reset themselves, like Rust, for example. They will have guilds that will essentially just control the server and then bully whoever new comes in. And as Chatfish are currently talking about, the Chinese are quite known for making very, very large guilds. Not being very good at the game, but building very, very large. And bullying the rest of the server.
That's very China.
In
The
Europe,
funny thing about them is that they suck at the game. They always fucking suck at the game. So you can very easily fight off the entirety of their guild if you just play well. when it comes to these kind of games.
in Europe, in Albion, there's like you got like 3 big English-speaking guilds maybe, and then you have like 7 big Polish guilds, and then you have like 20 massive Russian / like Mongolian guilds.
That's funny.
And when I was looking for a guild there, I was like, any English-speaking guild, and there were so many so many like Russians and Polish people who just messaged me like expletives.
That's kind of amazing, though. That's
Oh,
part of
that's
the
great.
appeal is the silliness of that. What's funny is these are also survival games too, technically. Isn't that
Albion
weird?
isn't necessarily survival, but it is open world crafting sandbox.
Mm.
And
Doesn't
it is
have the survival
entirely player
mechanics so much.
driven. It actually has pretty interesting things from a multiplayer perspective, because it has like little dungeons and stuff that you can do. There are solo dungeons, and there are also bigger dungeons for multiple people. And what happens when somebody dies is that a portion of their gear is stolen by the server, and it then gets distributed onto enemies. So when you're going around killing NPCs and you're finding like, because sometimes there are just normal monsters, and sometimes it spawns like a super version of it, and sometimes it's like a super version of it. And the rarer, like the bigger the mobs are, the higher their chances is that they're going to drop player loot. And you can literally find the best gear in the game just because somebody in a high tier guild was fighting someone like in PvP and just got murdered, and the server just joined his sword or something.
Hmm.
And that's a really cool system, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that is actually pretty cool. That's actually like, oh, where did this gear come from? This gear's actually from Bob. He died.
And this is something that I will say, that I think that survival games, especially surviving crafting sandbox games, do wrong. And in Albion Online, the game is about dying. Because it's about PvP, you are supposed to you're supposed to, like, what the core gameplay is about is increasing your character's like skills to a point where it's easier for you to make high tier gear, right? Or to make a lot of money. And then that lets you buy new gear faster. And when you can buy like higher tier gear, that means that you can go out and do more PvP, and you can win more in PvP. But you are also supposed to risk your gear. Like, you're not supposed to just have one, like, this is my ultimate gear set. It's about generating gear and using gear as like an expendable resource. So you go out and you die, and that's just a calculated part of the game. And this is sustain as a concept. It's about sustaining your equipment and sustaining playing the game. And to me, this is what survival is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about sustain, where gathering food and gear and all of this, it's supposed to be about sustaining your gear and maintaining it. And that's where linear games fall off for me, because it's usually just, you go and you make your silver sword, and then you just have your silver sword forever until you get to the next tier, and that's just it. So
Yep, and the silver
doesn't
sword
have
isn't
that.
valuable anymore. It becomes obsolete.
Yeah,
Relatively quickly.
and in sandbox games, it's the same thing, like, but it's a very difficult thing to do, right? Because getting food and maintaining like that has to be at a level where you can do it, but it needs to be difficult, and the range at where it's difficult is like a very, very, very tiny band, because often it just ends up with like, oh, okay, I can just do this one thing, and it just like abuses the entire game. Now I have infinite food. Or you literally just start farming and you have infinite food. And the second you have that issue, then the survival aspect is just broken. And if you don't have it at all, then you don't really have survival. It's just like a flavor.
Yeah. No, I get you. That's definitely kind of how it feels. Honestly, that's actually the one thing I actually liked about Eve Online, because I never played Albion Online, but it sounds very similar in terms of how it works. Because Eve, it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, you can do like PVE stuff, you can do like missions for other like PVE contractors and go deal with AIs and stuff and blow up stuff and whatnot. And what was always kind of fun was doing a mission and be like, oh, like if I fuck this up, ship I just put together and all its guns and weapons and drones. If it explodes, I lose all those, you know? They go bye-bye. Like one time I had to jump out and I had to leave a drone behind, and it was a very nice drone. I was like, damn, that was a good piece of equipment, because that thing cost me like 70 or 170,000 ISK, which is a lot of monies, I think, if I remember right. But it's annoying because I had to go and replace that drone, because even if I jump back there, the enemies blew it up. Or worse, you know, if it was a PvP thing, somebody gave up and I was like, oh, let's just throw that in the cargo hold and let's leave. It's gone. They took
Mhm.
it. My only big drawback is certain things where it comes to like you talk about hardcore survival. If I don't know if EVE Online still has it, but when I played, there was I think if you got potted, like you lost all your skills. If I remember right. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat. Because it's been so long since I played. Like 2016, I think was the last time I played, or 17. I can't
I
remember.
I haven't played it a lot, but I think the way it works is that you can like save your character, and then that's where you can like loan a new you.
Yeah, I think you
Isn't
can.
it something like that?
I think you have to update your clones. So every time you pay to update your clone, it updates with all the skills your clone possesses. I think it encourages making all weapons feel the same. You lost your augmentations, not skills. Okay. Okay, it was
Mhm.
the augments. Because the augments were expensive as fuck if you got potted. And normally it was a very dick thing to pod somebody. Like, even the people that were fucking with us, we never podded them. Because that once you do that, you're opening the gateway for something else. You're opening the gateway for some
Mhm.
really petty shit. Say, you
Yeah.
potted me, you bastard! My augments are gone!
No, I think that's good. Like it's actually really difficult to make like hardcore stuff for long-term games, right? Like people have been playing hardcore WoW, and even hardcore WoW is kind of like, at least personally, it's like borderline. Like, is this too much? Because the problem where you have like you wipe everything in a game like that is, or you finally get to raiding, and then like the tank disconnects, or
Oh, another player basically screws you up because, like, an internet outage or something. Like, something unforeseeable happens during a
yeah,
dungeon.
and then you just lose like 500 hours, and that's just terrible. Like when you die in Albion, it's kind of like when you die in Eve, though it's even less punishing. Like you literally just lose your gear, and the way your character is progressed is the more you use weapons. Like if you use swords, you can you unlock the next tier. Like, okay, now you can use tier 6 weapons. Now you can use tier 7 weapons. Now you can use tier 8 weapons. And it it to an extent it helps you like make more money, and that makes it easier to like get your gear back, but it doesn't directly like make you stronger. It just allows you to equip higher tier things. Now, it does have an aspect beyond that, where if you keep grinding like swords, it does like level it up from 0 to 100, which does make you better at swords, and that doesn't ever disappear. Because none of these things, you don't get any penalties or anything on your character. You don't lose it permanently. You just lose your gear,
Mhm.
and I think that's probably the better way to go for like an MMO scenario,
Yep.
because there's just too much salt involved if you lose your character permanently in a game where it takes like 600 to 1,000
Now,
hours to
we can wind this
play your
back to the
character.
core thing. In Project Zomboid, when you die, you lose all of your stats because that person is dead. That's why
Mhm.
Project Zomboid entirely bases its survival game around the fact that it tells you right at the beginning, this is the story how you died. Now, technically, they don't have it in yet, but you will be able to die of old age eventually. So you will die. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when in Project Zomboid. Just currently they don't have an age system in because there's no way to procreate yet. So there's no way to play as different characters that you sired or had.
Yeah.
And so I find that really cool because the concept of that is also nice. That's one thing that I like about Project Zomboid a lot as a survival game, is the idea of, yeah, you're gonna die, but this is the story of this character. And so when each character I make, I remember their name, and like, this character, and like all the things he did, all the adventures he did, and then he died, and this is how he died. And it's like, okay, that's cool. Like, the game sort of tries to prime you for the fact that, like, because it tells you right off the bat, this is the story of how you died. They say that in all the promotional material, like, you're gonna die. Don't get upset. Don't get tilted. You're gonna die. Like, it's gonna happen. Don't be a baby. Don't be a baby. Because that is 100% how the game is meant to be played. There is no respawn options. Once you dead, you dead. Now, what's cool about Project Zomboid is you can go out there and you can actually find your zombie or your corpse and actually recover your gear. What's always funny is when you see a player zombie and be like, oh, I think that's like Sturmrat over there waddling in that horde. Say, hey, zombie now. But that's always a neat thing. It also adds the cool aspect of your comrade may have died, or maybe an opponent of yours died, but now they're a little zombie, and killing a zombie is a lot easier than killing a player. Getting that gear.
Yeah, I mean, I really like permadeath in general, but it has to be in the right context.
Yep, the game has to be built for it.
Like, Project Zomboid is a much shorter term game in general than like an MMO. Like, I know the idea is that people are supposed to be able to run like super long servers and whatnot.
Yep, but the game has like seasons. It has year degradation. Like, they're even updating that to the point where buildings, old buildings, will actually, if they're not maintained or players are using them, they begin to deteriorate and diminish.
But I think that's probably like an ultra niche part of the player base. And I mean, that's fine, but it makes a lot more sense there. But it's still a little bit difficult to implement in a way that feels like it makes sense or even matters. Because at least in Project Zomboid, when you die and you make a new character, you're gonna have to start skilling up from the ground up. And with the mods we've been playing with, like when you can write down the journal and get your stuff back, like you might as well not have permadeath at that point.
Yeah,
right?
I want to get rid of the skill journal, honestly. I get why a lot of people, when we played it with them, they were annoyed by it, but it's like, for me, I'm not really bothered by it because the game was designed for me to die. Like, it's meant for me to die. Like, you're gonna die, and the game's trying to be like, hey, don't be a little pussy about it, Like, roleplay each character.
Death is a part of the process.
Like, the fun part about death in Project Zomboid and how integral it is to the game is you actually start to experiment with things you would never otherwise do. Fairman has been deaf so many times where it's like, Fairman's like, he got killed because he had bad hearing or bad eyesight and didn't see something. Because you try taking different builds. Like, maybe you take the deaf trait. Maybe you're feeling a little masochistic and you take the blind trait. Fuck it. Let's see how this goes. You get other positives from doing things. And I like the character building system where it's very much you take negative traits to offset the positive traits, and so you have to sort of strategize with each build. And be like, these are my weak suits. My character's gonna freak the fuck out if it's foggy outside. I like the evolving traits mod. I do think that adds a lot to the game, because what that does is it allows the game to be like, okay, I have smoker as a trait. I can actually get through this bad habit, but it's going to cost me. Or I can keep smoking. I can start trying to lose this trait. If I try to lose this trait, it's going to take me months in game, and that means it equates to multiple sessions of just committing to dealing with this bad trait. I'm gonna have my character's gonna be stressed, character's gonna have sadness, it's gonna have depression, and how Project Zomboid works is everything is multipliers. So negative traits multiply and multiply and multiply, which escalate to worse traits. which make you more prone to sickness, which make you more prone to that. And so you have to carefully balance that, especially if you're obese. One of my favorite traits is taking the obese trait because it forces me to be like, okay, I need to rest here, and I can't just kill everything because my character will not be able to do that. They will overexert and die. So you have to like work with the obesity as you lose weight, as you work your character up, as you build up your muscle and strength. I know a lot of our friends are really cheesy, and all they'll do is they'll just do the common build just to get all the muscle mass right away. But what I like doing is actually taking like no muscles, no strength, no endurance, and then just working this character up from nothing, right? They were incompetent, he was a coward, he's obese, and now he's got bravery, and now he's like in shape, he's fit now. Like, that's really cool to see the character actually grow and to turn a character around like that.
Mm-hmm.
I like aspects like that because it's the
Now,
big progress train.
the biggest problem with Project Zomboid when it comes to the permadeath aspect is that unfortunately, like skilling things up is just not fun.
Oh
It's
yeah,
usually just
books.
grind or books or just standing around doing squats for literally like 10 hours.
Mhm.
And like that is a big problem, but also I kind of don't like that you can go and just grab the stuff from your body. I kind of think that the body should just evaporate, even if it doesn't make sense, and even though it's like on a server where you might not know everybody, it's kind of nice to just, oh, I just found somebody's corpse and just loot their things. But what it really does is that it makes death even more meaningless, because you just go and loot your gear, and then you're basically the same character again. You're just like slightly worse. And in Valheim, you got the same problem. Like the way I was playing it was, if I died, I reset the world, and I started from scratch.
Yep, I
But
remember
if you're
your
playing
playthrough
like,
then, yeah.
but if you're playing multiplayer and you are doing like a permadeath thing, if somebody dies, he just comes back and you just give him new gear. And now it doesn't really matter that he died that much. Like, you literally just lose some more. You just lost some more, pretty much. So it can be kind of difficult to really implement it in a way where it's not just kind of annoying as well.
Yep. The big problem in a multiplayer sense is like, okay, if you die, right, and you had like a lot of skill in jumping and sprinting, you're now just gonna be a detriment to the entire group and party. And even if the party doesn't actually like get mad at you about it or anything like that or do anything, they're gonna be like, each encounter, you're gonna be notably the weekend because, well, you're diminished to such a degree. Even in that way, that works the same way in PZ as well. Like bringing on a little guy, even if you've got a lot of experience, the little guy is gonna be like, little guy, he's not very good at fighting. He just kind of sucks.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ragnarok says permadeath is just tedium, and this is true in certain aspects or in certain contexts, but I don't agree with it in a lot of ways. Like playing a game single player with permadeath on, like if you're playing Path of Exile, it's honestly like mostly ARPGs that do permadeath in a good way, because like if you die in Path of Exile, it doesn't take that long to like play a new character up to whatever, right? But as long as you can get into the mindset, like, I don't mind dying, then permadeath makes the game feel like everything matters a lot more, and it makes the game a lot more fun.
Gives tension.
I
The
feel
problem-
that permadeath is at its best when everything's in your control. Because it's your fault you die, not the random chance that the game just kills you outright.
I agree. Or your friend killed you and now you're not friends anymore.
Now you're not friends anymore. I've never had that happen to me. I've had friends get mad over nothing, hands, but like, It's a little accident. It's just,
Why shouldn't I kill hands?
why shouldn't I? But the reality is that, yeah, like, as long as it's not caused from server lag or something. But the hard part to know is that tilt factor. Because some people will complain and say that it is that. And this is more of a personal grievance than anything else. And be like, this game is buggy. It's like, no, it's not buggy. No, they're not cheating. You fucked up. Fess up to it. Like, oh my god. We're not going to name names, really, but you know exactly what I'm speaking of. We have friends that do that. It's like, they're cheating. They're watching the stream. It's like, no, they're not. They probably don't even know. Most people don't instinctively go and play a game and immediately type in War No Streams. So like, I'm going to be playing against a cheater. Yeah. Or somebody who's streaming, I can stream snipe.
I'm gonna
and stuff.
stream snipe.
Yeah.
Even though it's like 30 seconds behind.
Most people that even find out about that stream, most people are like, oh, that's cool. Like, I actually played against like a streamer. Oh, that's kind of neat. And I kicked his ass without cheating. Like, do people cheat? Yes. Will people cheat? Yes. Should you be a big baby about it? No. Like, people will stream snipe. They're just gonna do it. And you know what? As a streamer who's played with people who have cheated, you know what? Who cares? Like, yeah, it's stressful in the moment, but the reality is okay, well, you just don't play with that person next time. Or, okay, well, you know, you just get over it. Like, cheaters are gonna cheat, and I think my dad put it most, I don't remember how he put it, because he played generals, and you could always see in the stats if people cheated. He made it his lifelong mission in every Command & Conquer multiplayer game to beat the cheater. And he would actually do it on occasion, and it was actually impressive. I just remember, like, yeah, no, take that mentality. Like, fuck it, you know? Like, are you gonna let them ruin your time? They're trying to ruin your time because that's what they get their kicks off. Like, just buck up, man up, and get over it. There's also a big difference between playing on a private community server and playing on a global server. Absolutely, especially in the case of survival games. Oh, I played on PZ public servers and ARC public servers. I played on Sargon's public server, and that was just an experience. It's not good often, the reality. Private servers are often the best types of servers because generally the atmosphere will always be kind and cordial, and even if it's competitive, you'll normally have some repertoire with the little chatfishes you're playing with, right? You'll be able to be like, okay, you know, you got me, you little fucker, but next time your nipples are getting twisted, you know? Like, you're gonna have something to go off of. If you play with randoms, the big problem with randoms is that there are strong suits and negatives, right? The big thing about random, you never have to worry about stepping on somebody's toes because you're going to be a crybaby about it. Because we do have some crybabies. We know them. You know who you are. You're a crybaby. Bad. Don't be a crybaby. But that's the big thing when it comes to multiplayer. And especially private versus public, right? Public is a shit show. It can be amazing. Sometimes you'll make new friends doing public community servers. Other times, you're gonna just have a miserable experience. More often than not, it's a crapshoot on which direction it goes.
More gold, your majesty.
The risk you take when you play it. Also, Sturmat donates $1. Reduce says $1 for Papa Kibden. Thank you for your generous donation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, very generous. But yeah, definitely is highly dependent, and that there's no way around it. It's never going to be the same thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
And Squealing, how do you feel about private versus public servers?
I don't like either because I play this game solo.
That's not true. You play Valheim with people.
Yes, and we make so much progress so quickly that it feels like we're just blitzing past the game.
Actually, a part of me thinks that the multiplayer experience is actually better than the less people. Mostly because the weakest part of Valheim, to me, and again, some people disagree, is the gathering of materials. And specifically, the materials I'm referring to, of course, is the mining process in which you need to mine to get gear to get to the next thing. When you do it as a group, despite needing multiple sets for everyone, it's actually faster as a group, significantly faster.
We have more
you can just
inventory
have-
space to work with, more pickaxes to work with.
More
and people can just
working together.
specialize.
Yep. Some
One
guys
guy
just
is
gathering
running
food.
with the cart, and one guy is just mining.
Yep, you can actually just ferry stuff, and the guy mining just keeps mining while the guy at the cart runs back. Or they're ferrying from, because we had it on the little server that we were playing with the Chatfish, is that we were ferrying supply. We set up a portal. Now I'm not a big fan of portals because they do make travel trivial, and I just don't like that. It just takes away from the game, and you know it too, Squealy. I know Binsky shares my sentiment. But
I would agree with you if we had better line of sight. How far we can actually see. I would definitely agree with you. However, we don't. So we.
that
sailing
changes
is-
nothing with the portals.
I'm talking about sailing, because sailing is how you get around. If I can actually see my the monuments I make to tell me where I need to go from there.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
we're talking
it's
about
great.
portals,
Yeah,
not maps.
but portals make it
Easier, make the game. They just make the game easier. to
Portals should
get
be
around.
banned. Silverin says, when I played Dead by Daylight with friend, we would always end in same games with streamers we never met. Anyone who gave a shit about stream sniping, get good or get stomped. Yeah, pretty much. Like, screen peekers are screen peekers. They're gonna screen peek. But often I think that it's honestly a cope thing that streamers do. And often people with insecurities, like that aforementioned person we play games with sometimes. These insecurities amount to nobody stream sniping. Nobody fucking cares. Like, most people don't fucking snipe you because who gives a shit? And even if they do, boo hoo. There's one bad game. Oh well. There's gonna be more, right? My problem is when they're forced to play War Thunder realism. Oh. Thanks, Valheim as single player is really tedious. Yeah, no, games definitely change when you play them with a group or as an individual. Me personally, Project Zomboid as an example, will not play single player. Barotrauma will not play single player. Fundamentally, those games, like Barotrauma has more mechanics to do single player because you have a crew, you have command, and you can order the NPCs, and there's a whole system for it. I just don't like that. I do not like NPCs. I find them annoying to deal with. I prefer to have somebody to yell at, like Grumpy, and be like, Grumpy, you piece of shit! Get the engine working! Get the engine. Just hear bonking in the back of the engine room. Donk, donk. There's something different about the overall experience. But I would say Barotrauma has a single player component.
More gold, Your
PZ.
Majesty.
Yes, there are certain mechanics you're locked out of, like sleeping and stuff, when you do multiplayer, but like it's just the overall experience of the game. There's not enough to the base game, and I think you probably feel the same way, Robin. But the base game doesn't have anything to really engage with. Like, the only reason why it's fun to play with friends is because building a base together and having plans and objectives together. Like, let's go on an expedition together. You know, there's something to do. There's something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
It's an organized event. Yeah, the game has its problems, but all of them do. It's what its strong suits have. Holzenator donates $5. It says, I just finished gathering my second load of 300 iron, just to learn that I can almost skip iron armor and go straight to wolf armor. I am now taking a break from Valheim. Also, still haven't found trader. The trader spawn randomly.
Don't worry, you're gonna need that iron either way. That iron is more valuable than silver will ever be in that game.
No, iron serves a huge purpose in that game. So don't feel too glum when it comes to certain resources like copper and tin. Copper and tin is still valuable, even if you move past it in terms of gear.
The armor set that you make in the planes is made from iron, so don't worry. That iron's gonna be of use.
Yep, just stockpile it. Iron is actually, you've saved yourself future headache problems, honestly. I've never played it with debt or mods with women with more modern clothes that Kibscord tends to use. Wow, Sternfish.
Also, do not make silver tools. Silver tools are useless.
Giving us some pro tips there, saving him some headache. And
Make
just-
iron tools and then use black iron once you unlock it in the plains
My
for tools.
biggest problem with the more focused and linear of survival games, the most linear one I could think of is... Actually, I'm curious. You guys, is there a more linear survival crafting game than Barotrauma? Because Barotrauma is pretty fucking linear.
I can think of story games with survival elements, if that's what you want.
Like Green Hell, is that Subnautica? Those two are
Green,
linear.
those are extremely linear with what you have to do.
True, I guess
But for the
Barotrauma
most
is a
part,
little bit more free.
You can go
Yeah.
as you please, technically speaking.
I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know about Barotrauma, but like Valheim,
gotta get you to
it's
play it.
just extremely linear. Like
You have to work up the tech tree, aka
it's
gather
literally just
resources,
tier based.
make new
Yeah.
armor.
You
Gather resources
will
again after you
fight
kill a
that
boss.
boss. The only thing open world about it is the overall map generation and exploration fact. The exploration of Valheim has always been its strong suit, sailing the planet and just doing stuff. My biggest criticism to Valheim is its horrifically bad draw distance. It's actually abysmal how bad it is.
It can be a problem. Like I don't really have that much of a problem with it because I don't really navigate using those kind of landmarks. But
Oh, I'm just talking visually in general.
yeah,
You use the tree to get to.
But the problem is that when you're sailing around, because the game is tiered in the way it is, when you're playing it permadeath, if you're sailing around and you're looking for a forest, or even looking for a swamp, and you accidentally find a plains, and a mosquito sees you, that mosquito, if you're only one tier behind, is going to sneak up on you, and he's going to kill you into hits.
The best thing to do with when you come across mosquitoes is just have a bow on you, because having the bow will one shot it when it goes to dive in. If there's two, I'm sorry, you're fucked.
Yes, sir, linear as in there's
As in,
really
like,
only one way to progress.
Have to go away. I would say Minecraft is relatively linear. Just because you have to get iron tools to make
Yeah,
a progression,
in
and then you
terms of
have
its
to get diamond
progression,
afterwards.
Yes, it is absolutely linear. Like as far as Sandbox, in terms of progression goes, like the most sandboxy thing I think again falls to PZ, because you could just do whatever. The only thing progression wise the game has is skills, which
Yeah.
always start out of like a flat level usually. But you can literally do whatever. Nothing stops you from doing anything.
Terraria is also extremely linear.
Yes, that one
At least
hyper.
when it comes to
Because
what you can
resources
do
are gated
after-
until you
after
fight
next.
certain bosses, and the wall of flesh cannot be activated until you get the fucking eye monster defeated, if I'm right, I think. Or is it the little fucking dungeon master dude on the right hand side, or left hand side of the map? Can't remember.
I don't remember.
Been a billion years.
Either way, you have to go through a sequence of events in Terraria to actually unlock half the game.
Mm-hmm.
Just for catch up.
The thing that really puts me off Barotrauma is it's 2D. I don't see why that should, honestly.
I
Like-
think he just doesn't like the art style and the way it's presented.
No, I think that might just be negative connotations because old game. Because old games often, like Mario, like negatively impacts Terraria. Negative impacts Project Zomboid. Not Project Zomboid. That's Project Zomboid is isometric. It's a 2D game as well with 3D models in it, but by all intents and purposes, it's pretty fucking flat. There are buildings and elevation, but also it's flat as it's hard to describe. Granted, there is more. I don't know. Is there? No. See, Barotrauma is an experience that I think everyone should have. because it is a unique experience, like the likes of which I've never seen. It's got its problems, without a doubt. And yes, the visual perspective opens up problems, but the thematic of it alone and how it's executed when it comes to breaches and like water and stuff like that, and just as a core concept, and how water plays a pivotal role in pressure matters, hence barotrauma, an actual thing. Like, it's all, and no, don't Google that, by the way.
It's horrific.
It's absolutely horrific what barotrauma actually is. Not like as far as like the actual effect of what barotrauma is. Terrifyingly. There's some really awful, horrific stories. But the game has those stories that can unfold. And those stories happen because of the player. But I would say try to resist, like, dismissing it just because it is 2D. This happens a lot where games have like 16 bits, and like the low-res art, so to speak. Because low-res art games often get dismissed because they're low-res art. For example, Valheim gets dismissed by a lot of people because it's low-res. Project Zomboid gets dismissed because it's also low-res and doesn't have like high polygon counts on the polys that they have, or the models they have. Don't dismiss a game just because of its visuals if you can help it. Now, I know some people are going to be like, well, what about that game, like, that you played, that one naval game? There comes a difference between visual and not having visual, or worse, being boring and bad. That naval game we played a while back was just bad. It has no gameplay. It's just a spreadsheet. Literally.
Rule the waves.
Rule the Waves is terrible. It's not a game.
I do think that survival games are better in 3D though, in general.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or in first person, more specifically. Like third person can work, but first person, it creates more tension, and especially compared to like a 2D setting, like you can just have better functions in general, like walking into caves and into houses and stuff like that without it being weird and annoying.
Yep. When it comes to those things, you're gonna have to bounce around. Like, how do I put it? I think Barotrauma would be better if it was 3D. By a lot. But I also understand why it was developed in 2D. It started off as because the history behind it is, it started as a game that was developed by some indies, and they were just sort of putting it together, right? And then it was sort of a free game you could download. I remember when it was free. I played it back then. It was pretty rough, but it came along, and it became something really cool that was worth exploring and expanding upon. And that was after I think they actually got picked up by a publisher. When they stopped being indie, because they were indie for a while, and then when they started getting money behind it, it really started to develop and turn into something pretty fucking cool. Kib should play Buzz Aldrin's Space Program Manager. He'll hate it. That doesn't sound like a survival crafting game, now does it? She's like, well, maybe not necessarily. Rule the Waves is amazing. You're just uncultured. It just has no gameplay. It's just not a game. If it doesn't have gameplay, it's not a game, Jack. You can't do this. You can't do this. There kind of is a 3D PZ. It's called Humanit Z. Yeah, terrible name. It's lacking a lot of stuff that PZ had. I think I've actually looked at that a while back. Humanity. Yeah, it's sort of a three-dimensional sort of PZ. It's a little bit more action-focused. I've heard mixed things on it overall. But yeah, if Project Zomboid had a 3D equivalent, it'd probably be more interesting because you could be in first person. But especially with that scale and size, it would be epic. But the thing is, you got to remember that indies work within their means, and there are advantages to not being 3D or first person.
Mm-hmm.
Like an RTS benefits from the fact that it's, usually not in first person. Usually. And I say usually because sometimes it is and you just don't realize it. like Supreme Commander. It's actually in first person if you actually look at the environment, because you're actually staring at like a computer screen. But then it's like, part of the immersive aspect. So it says,
I would say that they are in general in first person because you are playing the commander.
true in that way, yeah, because you were playing as the commander of the situation. Like when Command and Conquer starts up, it's like establishing battlefield connection. Please stand by. Like I've heard that so many goddamn times.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, what it is you're the commander's eye view. I guess in a way, a lot of games are first person when you think about it, especially in the strategy genre. There are those that aren't, like Wasteland 3 or Fallout, I suppose, the originals. Those are actually bird's eye view and not in first person. And then there's no real lore explanation behind that. But in an RTS, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, it also doesn't really matter.
It doesn't. It's just an interesting thought piece, really. A little
Mhm.
bit of tism, if you will. Stiffy, a KSP survivor. I played KSP for literal years.
Kerbal Space Program.
Yeah, KSP died. Oh, yeah. I've never thought of the actual name. I always know it as KSP because nobody says the full
KSP.
name. Especially people that play. I have a couple friends that were super into KSP. It is tragic that it died, yes. Regrettable.
Well, the second game, well, it wasn't being made by the same devs, and
Yep.
they were making a
Well, I
pretty
mean,
bad game. for
to the
most of
fair
it.
to the same devs. I mean, to be fair to them, they made the game they wanted to make, which was KSP, and they were happy. They made that game, they made their money, people were happy, and they liked the game. Everybody enjoyed KSP 1. And they're like, we're happy, we're ready to sell and move on because we want to go do something else. And you know what? Respectable. They completed their game, sold their game to somebody else, the IP, and wanted to go do something else. It's regrettable that they sold it to a bunch of incompetent little bastards who, face planted the game into a cliff. But hey, details. There's a lore reason for that too. You're seeing. Oh god, it's Draconis. I should have realized that when I started reading. Real-time updates through soldiers' feeds, cameras, and being translated in real time by AI, also known as electronic video system. But what about Draconis? Bear this in mind. What about Warcraft 3? Explain that to me.
Don't think about it.
Destroyed. I absolutely BTFO'd little Conus. His little yinglet body could not handle what had just happened to him. Absolutely curb stomped him. The rage. Okay. Yes, KSP did release an early access. It's not a survival crafting game, though. I mean, honestly, one of the biggest problems I think with the whole survival crafting or open world things is that these tags are incredibly flooded, even on Steam. And I think Steam does a pretty bad job of curating them. Like,
There's so much shovelware.
Like-
So much goddamn shovelware.
Postal Brain Damage is a first-person shooter game that I might pick up one day. And no, I don't think I will because the company won't woke. But the game looks neat, right? But it's not a survival game.
Why is it? It's your wish list. Why is your wish list here?
Well, yeah, no, it's on my wish list because it has a survival tag. Like I almost guarantee you, I'll open this up and let's check the tags.
No.
We could probably
Nope.
fucking. I pressed the wrong button. What'd you say?
Boom, shoot. It does not listed there.
Survival
Then
tag.
again, like, fucking Steam tags are almost meaningless. They're almost meaningless.
They are meaningless, but that's because genre tags have become meaningless thanks to corporates. Like the reality is that corporations will slap on indies to almost anything and everything they can. Like, I guarantee you, I like Barotrauma, right? But Barotrauma is not an indie game. But I bet you it has the indie tag. Oh, it doesn't. Oh my
Nope.
god. Holy shit, I'm in shock. Gibble got BTFO'd on his own stream.
Let me find
Oof.
a better example of a
You know what? I'm happy.
indie game.
I'm actually happy. Maybe they actually started cleaning that up.
I like how Stardew Valley was self-produced, right? But it doesn't have the indie tag. At least on popular user tags.
My god, is Steam actually clearing up the tags? Could mine eyes tell me lies?
No.
Or am I just not finding the one that I was looking at? Because I remember looking and going like, and seeing a game that EA had pushed out, and I saw the indie tag, and I'm just like, EA, what the fuck? Like, we publish indie games. You publish indie games. Impossible.
There
Indie
you
means
go, okay.
independent developer.
Let's take, for example, Outer Wilds is a game developed by Mobius Digitals and
Outer
as a
Wilds?
publisher of Anna Puma Interactive.
Okay.
Yet they have the indie tag.
Oh, they didn't actually start cleaning it up. Yeah, it has it
No.
right there. And it has a publisher, so it's not. Yeah, 'cause it's like, check out the franchises and publisher. It's like, so never mind.
Yeah.
I got my hopes up for about a moment. I was like, are they actually starting to combat the abuse of the indie tag? Never mind. I mean, the best way to find out to check on the abuse of the tag itself, which is a problem inherent, is to just click on the tag and see if you see anything there. Wasn't No Man's Sky published originally?
No, it's by Hello Games.
They had an
And published
investor,
by
didn't
Hello
they?
Games. They have investors in the company, but they're published by themselves. Yes.
I thought Sony was behind it. Okay, well, it's good to see at the top there's actually there's actually a lot of actual indies. This should be an
Brian
indie
Dublin.
too.
No, he's back.
What was the game I was thinking of? Like the
Yep.
Microsoft published indie games.
That's
so,
not
not
an indie
indies.
game. Yeah, so there's another not indie game there. That's an indie game. Good.
Stray, a indie game? No, it's not.
That's
Developed by Blue
not
12,
an indie game.
published by Anacoma Interactive as well.
Yeah, so it's a crapshoot. There are some indies over here. Like this should be an indie. Yeah, like Super
I
Giant,
think
I don't like them, but
Anna-
they're an indie.
I think Annapurna Interactive specifically is abusing the indie tag. Because they're a publisher that have a lot of games that are labeled indie but are not indie.
Yeah, that happens sadly. And so what you have in here is a mixture of actual indie games, which are intermixed with non-indie games. Like War Pips is not an indie game, so they shouldn't be here. But Isanzo, they are an independent, and they should be here, you know? They're inflating the tag.
Yeah,
It's-
Annapurna Interactive are doing that. They're a publisher that will have a lot of their games labeled indie but are not indie.
Oh, I hate when they do that.
Because I've looked at 3 of their games so far and they've all had the indie tag, yet they're all being published by Annapurna Interactive.
I almost got BTFO'd by stream today, but fortunately Kibos was able to recover by finding out
really-
they're still abusing the tag.
He's actually this cursory look like Outer Wilds. That can't have a fucking.
Squirrel immediately
Self-published.
saved Gibbs from being destroyed on his own stream. That was close. Woo! Wouldn't be the first time. Won't be the last. All right,
Yep.
let's see. Low poly graphics cartoon shared equals indie. Yeah, pretty much. Shader. Yeah, I was like shared. I was like,
Small dev team, basically indie. No.
he has a small dev
No.
team. It's indie. It's like, okay, but did they receive outsider money? It's like, yes. It's like, not indie, are they?
Do you know what indie means?
Indie is either they're funding it out of pocket themselves, or they're like us and crowdsourcing. We crowdsource.
Yeah.
Your donations are the only reason why the studio is still operating. That bar right there, if it does or doesn't fill up, will determine whether or not we continue to exist or not. If that bar doesn't fill up, we disappear. There will be no more streams. There will be no more independent game development. It's gone. That's what would happen if it didn't fill up. We'd be gone. That's what determines indie or not. You have to have a
The
source of
indie
revenue.
game FIFA made by the small dev EA.
I don't think they
It
claim that
It
there.
reminds me when CA was taking money for indie developers. Small company CA.
They got a fighting game fest going on. Wow, we talked about fighting games a bit today.
Oh yeah,
That's true.
Blizzard's not indie anymore. Technically speaking, Stone Age. They're owned by Microsoft now.
Oh, they weren't. They haven't been indie for a while. They were
Hmm.
bought by Activision during Wrath of Lich King's development.
Yep. So we went from independent to owned.
For a
published.
while, Blizzard was, yes, I believe independent. I think I don't remember if they actually had a publisher. Can't remember.
Hmm.
What are you talking about, Blake? What do you mean, look, Kip?
He wants you to look at Dead or Alive 6.
What? That's not a survival game.
But you're looking at the Steam store, that's why he's pointing it out.
Is it safe to pull up?
No.
I was deceived.
Well, Dead or Alive's an actual fighting game, yes. Dead or Alive itself, I wouldn't suggest looking up if you want to have it on stream.
Mhm. But either or, I think we have covered the basis of our topic today. As far as survival crafting, sandbox versus linear, there's a lot that can be taken away from both games that have linear focuses and more structured focuses versus the more sandbox approach. All in all, I don't think there is a right answer to either. It's just really a matter of what you guys prefer. Like, do you guys prefer the PZ approach, or do you like a more structured approach like Valheim or, you know, Minecraft and stuff like that, where you have a more structured progression to work with? Some people like that, and I think there's no real disagreement in the fact that they all have their strong suits. I think the big thing really starts to appear is when some are just, you know, not done well or not done as well as they could be, like, you know, Ark or something like that. But either way, Chatfish, we're going to be doing, the next stream is going to be detective games. So get your little detective hats on, and we'll see you in the detective stream. Thank you for your generous donations today. And we'll see you in, I think, about like 4 or 6 minutes. See you soon, chat. Bye.
Bye bye.
Have a good one.